Hello everybody and welcome back to the Leeds Lens. It's not a transfer news show today, of course, that finally finished yesterday. We are going to talk though a bit about sort of the wrap up of the transfer window. There's been quite a big piece come out from Isaac Johnson today and quite a big piece come out from Beren Cross as well, talking about what happened in the transfer window, where the £40 million that we put to Strand Larsen went if it didn't go on Strand Larsen. What's Farke's position on the transfer window? Is he happy with the transfer window? He obviously made them remarks about the goalkeeper coming out of the Arsenal game as well that made it quite clear that he wanted a new one. But what is his overall thoughts? So a bit about that. I also want to talk about sort of the survival race at this moment in time as well, because I've actually got sort of a big thing, I think, to bring to you guys about the survival place and where if Leeds United can be at a certain point, at a certain spot, I think they are in a fantastic position to stay in the Premier League. So we'll talk all about that. There's also loads of other bits as well to get into today's. Should be quite a big show. But of course, as well, if you could help the channel by dropping a like, subscribe, all that good stuff. The transfer window has ended now, so I imagine it's going to be the hardcores that are back with me, of course. But so if you could help the channel by dropping a like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Almost it's more important than ever for me now, naturally, because the support will naturally drop, obviously, with the news, sort of the transfer news, which naturally engages so many people falling off. So if you could do that, that would be fantastic. Anyway, let's start with one of your guys' comments. And Easy said, why are there so many fans criticising the 49ers? They got us promoted, they are updating the stadium, we're not in the relegation zone. I think they are the most professional owners the club have had. Do you know what, Easy? We don't always agree, mate. As you know, we've had back and forth on the manager, we've had back and forth on a lot of different things, pro as well. I think you nail it. I think you've nailed on the head there. That's my stance, and I'm sure you'll have watched potentially my video yesterday, and we talked a bit about this. I'm nowhere near as frustrated with the owners as other people are. There's a lot of people saying that they're arrogant and they're useless and they haven't got a clue what they're doing and they've got no idea about football. Based on what exactly is my kind of feeling. I know a lot of people are unhappy with the transfer window, and look, we talked on this channel, the transfer window wasn't the most fantastic sort of window in the world. Obviously, we brought Buonanotte in, who I do think will plug a gap for us. I do think at times this team lacks creativity. I think he'll bring that. So I do think he's a really good signing. But obviously, people, when you see this link Strand Larsen, you don't get him, and there's no obvious replacement. I understand the frustration behind it. But I think basically to throw the rest of their body of the work into the sea and into the bin based on us not maybe getting a left back that you wanted in, I think's a bit harsh, personally. That's my feeling. And as Easy says, I do think they've done a lot for the club, and I think they've progressed us more than any of the owners we've had probably in the last 2 decades, if we're being totally honest. So a part of me goes, well, but owners are never going to be absolutely perfect and do exactly what you think all the time. So sometimes you've got to take the rough with the smooth a bit. And we've had terrible owners in the past, and I almost feel like this isn't the case, by the way, because I know a lot of people who are really critical of the ownership at this moment in time, and they're sort of people who've supported the club for years on years on years longer than I have. But it does feel a bit like, do you not forget what we had in the past and how bad it was beforehand, like with other owners like Radrazani, but even worse than that when we had Bates and Cellino and all these clowns in charge. I don't think it's anywhere near as bad as that, and I think you're right to bring that up, Easy. I completely agree with you. I think they are the most professional owners we've probably had in 2 decades. So I do feel a bit sort of like, I'm just not getting on with this negativity. We are in a good spot, as we're 6 points above the relegation zone. We're in a good place, and I think it's a bit unjustified. And I was listening to Square Ball today, and they were sort of mirroring what I was saying a bit in terms of where their stance is. And truthfully, with all this, the proof will be in the pudding. As we talk about, like, if we get to the summer and we're relegated, we can come on here, we can criticise the board, we can criticise the manager, we can criticise the players, we can criticise anything you want. But at this moment in time, we're not in the relegation zone. We're 6 points ahead of the relegation zone. It would still take quite a leap for West Ham to get out of it, obviously with the position they're in at this moment in time as well. And I don't think they've turned into the greatest team in the world overnight, although I do think they'll be better. So I think we've got to judge it at the end of the season now. That's my feeling. We had I remember a massive disaster it was in the last January transfer window when we didn't sign anybody, and it was our best season we probably had for 5 years when we finished obviously top of the league, 100 points. So I feel I'm with a bit easy. So let's see the proof in the pudding and let's see where we are come the end of the season, the end of May, and then we can have a discussion then. That's kind of where I'm at with it. Anyway, let's talk a bit about sort of Daniel Farke's view of the transfer window, because this came in The Athletic today, obviously, like I mentioned at the start. Beren Cross did a whole piece about sort of where, sort of how the transfer window went, where we're all up to with the transfer window. And he's basically said that Daniel Farke is understood to be content with how the window played out. Now, this is something that I wanted to bring to the show first of all, because I've seen a lot online, part of sort of this conversation, around about sort of, oh, Daniel Farke might walk because of this, and Daniel Farke would be absolutely furious, and they haven't backed him and stuff. Well, we've now just been told by one of the most credible people in the Leeds United space, who covers Leeds United, saying that actually Daniel Farke is okay with this transfer window. So I do think that kind of squashes that rumour a bit. I also don't think he's been left out to dry. I actually think he's... Some of the reasons we didn't maybe buy some players that that in the transfer window is because we want a board agreement. We also want a manager agreement on certain signings. And I think sometimes maybe Adam Underwood, for example, would present targets, and I would imagine Daniel Farke goes, no, I don't want that signing. And maybe he can be not at blame as such, but I think he can sort of take a bit of the sort of flack, if you want to put it that way, because obviously he's involved in negotiations, and not in terms of the price points, but he's involved in negotiations about which player should be involved with the football club and sort of thing. So, as I said, and he's also, as I said, content with how they've operated it, and he feels the right targets. He also says that he feels that the right targets didn't emerge, and they simply didn't emerge, particularly a left back, which is why, as I said, the football club didn't pursue it. So the football club basically saying that as I said, the right targets didn't appear for the price points they wanted to pay, and they felt decent value in the market for what we could actually offer. And they'd be a good fit for the team, and that didn't happen, so we didn't do anything. And I kind of agree with that. I don't think us just buying players that we don't agree with for the sake of it, just to sort of appease the fan base, is what they're going to do. And I think they've shown now with this ownership that that's how they are going to operate. They are going to do a bit sort of, we know best, and they don't always know best. And I actually think us fans have seen so much of this football club over the years, and I would say this about Premier League fans in general, really, not just at our football club. But I do think the fans know a lot. I always value fan opinion, and as we know, that's what we do here. We always talk about fan opinions. It'd be stupid me saying they don't. But I do think fans who consume it like we all consume it, I do really think that they are. That they know what's going on with the football club. A lot of them, I think we do. I think if the consensus for 95% of the fan base is a certain outcome, usually the outcome is the right idea. I usually do think that. Jacob says, win on Friday, we'll settle this week, but I do think it could come back to bite us. It could, mate, it could. And they have, I will accept that they've taken a risk. I would accept they've taken a calculated risk, though, in this January, and I also think they took a calculated risk potentially in the previous January, and maybe even the previous January before that. So we will see how it goes, Jacob. But as I said, I'm kind of the opinion now, let's park it, let's talk about it and talk why, and try to understand the reason a bit, but in the same breath, the proof will be in the pudding, won't it, mate? The proof will be in the pudding. I can't believe the negativity after the window. Slightly disappointed, but we are better than we were at the start. That's kind of where I'm at. I didn't, as you know, Gibson, because you're obviously regular in the chat, I didn't expect it to be a window full of unbelievable signings. I just didn't think that was going to happen. I think it was obvious with our PSR position, which I do think is a constant problem, and I don't think gets spoke about enough, as we talked about yesterday. I don't think there's enough flack that goes to the Premier League from fans talking about sort of the problems with PSR, and obviously it's changing there now anyway, so it's probably not a relevant point. But as you said, let's sort of. I couldn't believe how strong it was. I understood it more in the summer, but I couldn't believe how it was in January. I really couldn't, especially when we got told we weren't going to do anything by Robbie Evans at the start. After the summer transfer window, PSF says the only thing I was mildly critical of, the 49ers were keeping Farke, but I was also impressed by their commitment to continuity by keeping Farke. Yeah, look, I remember when obviously Farke went through that rough point earlier on in the season, obviously when we lost to Nottingham Forest and we lost to Villa, and it was really ramping up on Farke. But I think PSF, from what we've said, you've always been quite sort of, you have your opinions of Farke, but you've always been quite a sort of rational in where you're going. And your opinions don't seem to bounce week by week, which is obviously kind of where I'm at, probably in a different stance to you, but which obviously I can appreciate, because I think that's where the 49ers are at. I don't think they go game by game, and I don't think that they're an ownership group who are going to make loads of emotional decisions. I don't think that's how they're going to operate. And again, I think you've seen that. I think if you look at sort of, as I said, how the Forest ownership and how West Ham of ownership have dealt with this January transfer window compared to us, I know they've got different climates in terms of PSR position, but I can see, you can smell the emotion coming through with the way that they're operating, and the scattergun approach, especially Forest, I think, took up on the final few hours of the window, and constantly do, as I don't think you're going to see that with the 49ers. It's much more sort of solid, and I think long term it will be successful, hopefully. It's just about staying up this first year. Jacob says, by the summer, if we stay up, we will be much happier than we did spend in January. Could be a slight risk. Yeah, true. Hi, mate. Do you think Perry will start Friday? I don't. I think he'll stick with Darlow. I think he prefers Darlow. I personally prefer Darlow. I've seen a lot of sort of combined 11s today about sort of where we should line up in our best 11s, and a lot of it in my opinion, have had Perry in there from what I've seen. I just disagree with this. I think obviously Darlow made that big mistake against Arsenal, and it was a big mistake. But I think we've seen Perry make enough mistakes that I think Darlow should get the benefit of the doubt with this one. Players, you can't just switch your keeper week in, week out. I think he's obviously, since he's gone to Darlow now, he's got to stick with him. I think if Darlow makes a continuous errors for the next few weeks or just starts underperforming in other manners and parts of his game don't improve, then we can look at swapping the keeper again. But with keeper, it's different to other positions. You don't want to be switching your keeper week in, week out. You want to build that continuity with the defence with your keeper. So now he's moved to Darlow. I think it's important for me that he sticks with Darlow now for the next 4 or 5 or 10 games. Obviously, if he starts making mistake after mistake after mistake, he has to come out. But right now, I think it's a situation for calmness with the goalkeeper position, and I would continue to play Darlow. I think he's a better keeper, personally, from what I've seen than Perry. I feel if Nemecha can stay fit, he can go back to the 2 up front. See, I was thinking about this today, Ashley, and it's an interesting point that you brought up. I don't think we're going to see 2 up front from Farke for the rest of the season, potentially. Maybe he'll play it in the last game against West Ham, but I don't think we'll see it, because I think he'll be worried that if he plays 2 up front, if one of them, there's a situation there where you're risking them both in a game. Whereas obviously if one's sitting on the bench and one's playing, then there's less chance that they both get injured at the same time, if that kind of makes sense. And obviously with only having 2 big physical strikers, I don't think you'd want to risk playing them both at the same time. So for me, it's going to be a situation where it's going to be 1 up front the whole time, really. And I think when we've got these sort of big, tricky away games, it might start Lucas Nemecha like we saw when we played at Anfield away. And then I think in the more quote-unquote winnable games, we should see then probably Calvert-Lewin start and then Nemecha come off the bench. Obviously, Nemecha is also still injured. But I think the time for the 2 up front was a Chelsea one-off game plan, and I don't see us continuing to do that long-term, personally. Who would you put... who've put you at... Put who at right wing? So currently with the Bogle's playing right wing, this is actually sort of when Leeds United play the system at the moment, actually in possession we look quite a lot like this. Like a lot of people remember Rodon against Crystal Palace, people mentioned it all the time. He almost moved into a back 4, and actually in possession I think it looks much more like that at the moment, the way we play, which is why obviously it's kind of built like that. Perry shouldn't have been dropped and needs to return Friday. I disagree, PSF, but fair enough, mate. I just don't really rate Perry. He's just one of them players that I don't think he's settled properly. I think he struggled, obviously. When he first came into the club, he obviously got that injury. I think he came with injury as well, so there has been problems. But I look at how he plays and I just don't see it. I just don't see it with him personally. I really don't. Jacob says we still have a lot of players we could sell on. Help PSR like Nonto, Tanaka, Gellart, and Mateo Joseph, which needs to happen so we can improve the squad. Yeah, look, in the summer there will be some interesting sales. I think that's one thing you can always criticise with the 49ers, especially not since they've sold Rutter, Somerville in that window and Gray. I think you can criticise sales that we've made at the football club. I don't think we've sold well enough. And I think this summer we're going to have to see some probably departures and definitely some, a lot of incomings this summer, you'd hope, if we are in the division. So I do agree with that. And I think there might have to be some tricky decisions made depending on what it's like till the rest of the season. We've got this far and still not in the bottom 3. If we match West Ham's results, they'll eventually drop their heads. Yeah, I agree, Ashley. I think... Look, I want to get onto this, and I want to talk about this later in the show after we get through some other things. So I want to talk about Strand Larsen and what happened there and a few other bits, since that's what sort of the news is today. But I do want to talk a bit about the relegation battle as well, because I am... we'll get onto it anyway, is what I'm saying. John says, now is the time for the directors to start working on transfers in the summer. 100%. They've messed up these 2 windows up to now. Doesn't give you confidence going forward to get to work. Look, I disagree with you, John Pepper, and I think for me the proof's in the pudding in terms of we're a newly promoted team. We've bought players that I think have worked so far this season. For me, probably outside of Perry, and maybe there's a conversation about Okafor, but for the most part, pretty much all the signings have worked in the summer. I think Buonanotte will be a good sign as well, but we'll see if that's the case from now until the end of the season, of course. And the proof will be in the pudding. If as I said, if we're staying in the league, then I think they've pretty much done a good job. But you are right. We need to start working on summer deals straight away now, of course. And that will be the start. The main start of get it. If people are not I don't know how clued up people are about transfers, but the January international break, obviously the last international break, which will be before the World Cup, the January international break is always when you get a bit of transfer news, because that's when clubs usually start talking to players that they're linked to in the summer. So we'll obviously keep our heads close to the ground regarding that period, and there might be some transfer updates then. But I would imagine Leeds United are already starting to formalise in their deals for the summer. We obviously know Strand Larsen, from what we're about to get onto, was a summer deal, moved forward. So again, he was someone that they're probably looking at this summer, especially with the situation with Wolves going down. Michael says, is Justin fit? Rumours is a toe problem plus a Rodon injury. I think the Rodon injury is nonsense from what I know, and I do think Justin's got an injury. I don't know what the injury is, but I think he's got an injury. Wow, Perry may prove you wrong. Maybe. He might not get his chance though, mate, in truth. He might not get his chance. Mate, the thing is with this Perry situation, I hope I'm wrong. I hope from now until the end of the season, he's the best keeper in the league if he gets his chance. Of course I hope that. I hope he completely proves me wrong. I just don't think he will. Because the fact of the matter is, if Perry proves me wrong to the rest of the season, then he'll have a brilliant season and everything will be fantastic. So I'm hoping I'm wrong. But I don't think I will be. Would you like to see Sean Longstaff or Facundo Buonanotte start Friday? I think Sean Longstaff should come into the 11, yeah. I'd give him a go now, probably over Gruev, and I think he offers a bit more attacking threat than Gruev. And obviously when we're playing a quote-unquote easier team at home than Arsenal, I think you want someone who's going to get more involved in the attacking phase of the game. So I would go with Longstaff. I think there's maybe a toss-up there with Tanaka, but Tanaka recently, for me, hasn't took his chances when he's had them at times. So I would go with Longstaff, yeah. I think the midfield three should be Ampadu, Stack and Longstaff at the weekend. Is the lack of transfers the recruitment board, or Daniel asking for the perfect candidate and deal, or a bit of both? Who is to blame? I think it's a bit of both, mate. I think it's a bit of both. I think we've obviously now, in comparison to it before, we've got obviously a team of people who do transfers. So we've got, naturally, you've got Adam Underwood involved. You'll have Robbie Evans involved in terms of later on in terms of how much these players are going to cost. We know Daniel Farke's involved. I imagine Prague at times gets involved as well. There'll be a lot of people talking around sort of transfers, and they're obviously naturally when they make an agreement, every single person's probably got to be on board with the deal. So we don't really know. We don't know the inner workings of the board, but naturally, the more people who've got involved, the more chance that someone says no, and naturally, obviously, the more chance that we then are a bit more specific with our targets. I think truthfully, to sort of round up with this transfer stuff, and sort of where we're at with the board and how it all operates, I think we've got a point where we're very, very specific in the targets we want. And I think in certain scenarios, that's going to be a real beneficiary for us. And I think in certain situations, it's going to be a real negative for us. So I always think in deadline day, maybe we should have looked at the Ortega deal, I do believe, and maybe we should look at this Nets deal that obviously Mönchengladbach did with Forest. Maybe we should have done that. But obviously, in the same breath, if you're gonna go with your more specific targets, you're more likely to hit. So if everybody's on board, the chance that it's a successful transfer is much more increased naturally. But it also means that you're more specific. So it works hand in hand, doesn't it? I imagine Leeds United have more a hit rate with transfers in terms of we probably get more right than wrong. But we'll also then go for less targets because that's naturally how it work. So that's kind of where I'm at with it, really. What would your starting 11 be ideally, mate? I'll quickly go through this, Ashley, but we will talk about this later in the week when we've got to build up, and we'll do like a preview or whatever, probably on Thursday. But off the top of my head, Darlow, Bogle. I think if Beale's back, then Rodon Beale. If it's not, obviously now. I think Justin's going to be out, so he'll miss the game. Strauch, Goodmanson, Stack, Ampadu, Longstaff. I would still go with Aronson. Personally, and then I would go with Calvert-Lewin up front. That would be my team. Regarding Perry, I feel he needs to adapt to the Premier League and needs to read the game a bit more, says Ashley. Yeah, look, Perry, I'm not completely right. Well, I am in a sense, to be fair, but I just don't think it's going to work really. But and I think there's a few attributes and a few reasons why that. I've talked about kind of a lot, so I don't want to go into too much. Smash a like and keep it up. Thank you very much, Golden Boy. I appreciate that. Yes, and like he says, if you could help the channel, drop a like, subscribe, all that good stuff. It does massively help me. Jake says, only good thing about Pro staying is that if we go down, we've got a top striker. We shouldn't be thinking like that. I agree with that. I'm confident in Farke and the team, and the team problem is other content YouTubers, KJ and Connor, are negative. Wish they'd back the club more. Look, the thing is with this, Stephen, is that obviously maybe you'll attract a more sort of different maybe content creators, and that's absolutely fine. Look, the thing is with this, everyone's entitled to their own opinion. So as much as I at times disagree with them too, and I think that they probably go more negative, they are probably more negative about the current climate than I am, and I think that's probably what I think they'd probably agree that with self if they watch the content, which I'm sure they probably don't. But they're entitled to their opinion, and a lot of people like what they do. I just disagree with them fundamentally. I don't think we should have gone really and bought loads of players in January. I don't think that was the play at all, personally. We've signed some good players, but we still need more attacking players. Main priority next summer: left back, centre back, striker. Agree with that. I agree with that, John. Anyway, let's talk a bit about the Strand Larsen deal. So where it was at with the Strand Larsen deal, and actually, if you followed this channel for a while, I actually am quite pleased with this because this is kind of what I said. And basically, apparently, Strand Larsen, this is from Bering Cross, from club sources, was just seen as an opportunity, not a necessity. So it was basically, like we said at the time, it was an opportunity in the market for Leeds United. But apparently, Daniel Farke didn't feel that it was necessary that we bought him to stay in the Premier League. So it was basically a case of we're moving a summer target from that we were going to do in the summer forward because there's a possibility of better get him in this window. And they felt he was basically the right age, physical presence, goals, sort of everything part of it they felt he was the perfect player for Leeds United to go get. However, of course, it was naturally quite a difficult deal to complete, and I think obviously when Crystal Palace came in there, we couldn't get near their offer, and we were offering a loan with obligation, apparently, not money up front. There was apparently quite a substantial loan fee, but not like what Crystal Palace were going to offer, and then they obviously came in and blew us out the water, and that's kind of the thing with it, really. And that's kind of the end of it. And with the money that sort of we had that we didn't spend, basically, again, they're quite happy with the squad from all accounts, and that was a summer target move forward because he might not be able to get him in the summer, etc. And they didn't see that as a priority position massively. They apparently looked at all positions apart from centre midfield, so they look everywhere to see the best sort of options, but nothing really came available, obviously outside of Buonanotte. But that's kind of where we're at with it, really. And that's kind of why they didn't spend the money. I don't think I've explained that unbelievably well, in truth. But to sort of map it up, basically, they moved it. They're quite happy with the squad, but they're going to move a transfer forward because he was able to get in January, which they didn't expect. But when that deal fell through, there wasn't another option like that in the market to go do, so they didn't do it. Ollie said, evening, excited for Daniel Farke's presser tomorrow. Could be quite interesting. Yeah, it could. It's a shame, actually, that I'm working tomorrow because I would obviously just go live straight after the press conference. But obviously, that will be tomorrow's stream. So we'll talk all about sort of his presser, injury news, because I'm expecting some injury news. Hopefully, BL, etc.'s back. And yeah, that's kind of where we're at. Anyway, let's move on a bit to let's move on to a bit to the relegation sort of situation. And I've thought this for a while about our fixtures, but we've been obviously naturally brought up with transfers, so it's kind of not something that's probably gone aside. We're obviously in a good spot at this moment. I think this Forest game is huge for us, and I'll tell you why I think it's huge. If you look at our games after Forest, I don't know if you're aware of this, but probably a lot of you are, but we've got Chelsea away after that, we've got Villa away, and we've got Man City at home for our next 3. And then when we've done them, we get to our last 10 games, which we all are aware we've got really good fixtures in. So what I'm thinking is, if Leeds United can beat Forest this weekend, then West Ham are going to have to get to level points before them. So say we then lose the next 3 after that, which is, I don't think will happen, but it's plausible that it could based on the fixtures that we've got. So if we beat Forest and lose the next 3, we'll have obviously got 3 in our next 4 games. And then you look at sort of West Ham, they've got Burnley away at the weekend, which I think they probably will win. Then they've got Man United at home, Bournemouth at home, and Liverpool away. I think they'll probably lose at Liverpool because I think they've picked up form based on what I watched at the weekend. So then they've got Bournemouth and Man United, where realistically, if we beat Forest, they're going to need to win both of them to be level on points going into the last 10 games. But where I'm at is, if we can get to that Sunderland game, and I've said this so many times, but I think it's really important now. But if we can get to that Sunderland game, and we've got, say, even 3 points on West Ham going into that Sunderland game, which if we beat Forest, they would have to win 3 of them 4 to get to, or 2 of them, if they won 2 of them 4, we'd still have 3 points on them going into that game. And that's bearing in mind we lose all of those. Then we'd be in a really, really good spot going into it. And then if you look at our last 10, if we get to that point, in our last 10, this is just on home fixtures. We have Sunderland at home, we've got Brentford at home, we've got Wolves at home, we've got Burnley at home, we've got Brighton at home. So if we beat them, we'd still be 3 points ahead, and then we'd have them games. Whereas you look at West Ham's fixtures, they've got, in the last 10, that are like really quote-unquote good fixtures on paper. They've got Wolves at home, which you obviously expect them to win. They've got Everton at home, and then they've got us at home as well. And that's it. So if we can just get to that point where we play against Sunderland, and we have maybe 2 or 3 points ahead of West Ham, and we can beat Forest, we are in such a good position to stay in the Premier League. It's ridiculous because our fixtures are so much better. And if anyone said at the start of the season you'd be in that position, you'd have snapped their hands off because of the fixtures we'd have coming up. And I know we've obviously still got to win them games, and that's absolutely fine. But that is a point where we can get to there. We should be in a brilliant position. And like Jacob said, the next few home games, I believe, are all under the lights. So we know obviously Forest is this Friday. I believe Brentford's under the lights. I think that might be a midweek game, but it's under the lights. And obviously, I believe the Sunderland game is also potentially under the lights as well. And we know Leeds United under the lights. I think we've played 5 games under the lights at Ellen Road, and we've won 4 of them. And the only game we've drawn is the Liverpool game, which obviously is not a bad result regardless. We've beat Chelsea, we've beat Everton, we've beat West Ham, and we've won another as well, which someone probably remember in the chat. So yeah, that's another thing to bear in mind. But all I'm saying is, if the next 4 games, this next 4 chunk before we get to last 10 is massive. If we can be in a good position going to that last 10, then it's ours to mess up then, because the games are there to be won. And let's be frank here, we should be beating Burnley. We should be definitely beating Wolves at home. And to be honest, we should be beating Sunderland at home in terms of how bad they are actually away from home. They're still unbeaten at home, by the way, but away they are pants, as we just saw with recent West Ham. So we should win them 3 games. So if we can beat Forest, then we've got in our last. Then if we win them 3 as well, that'd be the 4 wins. Which then, if you get nothing against the rest of them, that'd still be 12 more points, which would put us on 38. And then you just need 2 draws in the rest of the games to be fine, really, because then you beat your 40 points, which is probably the aim. So as I said though, get past these 4 games, get a win against Forest, then whatever happens in the next 3, hopefully pick up points, but worst case scenario we don't, and it gets a bit tighter, and then accelerate into the last few games, and hopefully we can be in a good position. I think that's how it's going to work, really. Must win on Friday. Nothing else. Look, depending on if West Ham lose and we get a draw, it's probably not the worst thing in the world. In fact, if West Ham lose and we draw, I'd probably snap your hands off of that right now, just because I expect them to beat Burnley. So even if we beat Forest, I've got the same amount of points. So, you know, that won't be the worst. John Pepper says 9 there, 9 points there, easy. Chelsea, Man City, and Villa. Yeah, mate, that'll be unbelievable. But I'm presuming you kind of taking the mick a bit there. But Jacob says if we've got a small gap between the relegation zone, I believe we stay up. Yeah, I agree. It's getting to that Sunderland game, and we should beat Sunderland really with how bad they are. And then at that point, we've got all them other good home games in terms of Brentfords and Brightons, etc. But we still then got Wolves and Burnley, who realistically we've got to be beating them. If we're not beating them, we deserve to go down really. Burnley West Ham a solid 0-0 incoming, hopefully. My team for Friday, if Biol is not fit, Darlow, Justin, I think Justin might be have a knock as well, mate. So it might have to be borne out, but I'll really rest him from that. Ampadu, you won't go Ampadu. Yeah, I don't mind that. I think the option to go to a 3-4-3 with Buonanotte and Aronson could be quite an interesting one. And I think at some points in games we should utilise that. I think especially when we're playing Burnley at home or maybe like Wolves at home like we've got. Yeah, I think that wouldn't be a bad option. Next few home games under the lights. Yeah, good morning. Good morning to you, Cobra. John Pepper says Palace. We have got Palace away to play as well. And in terms of Palace going down, I still don't think they will. But yeah, maybe. Ashley says, I think we can get another 4 wins and an odd draw that should do the job. And if we can beat Forest, that's a big boost. Yeah, look, if we beat Forest, we're at 29 points and we're going to need 11 points then from 13 games. Which, again, if we don't do with the games we've got, that's a disaster, really. Brentford is at 8 PM on a Saturday night as it stands, but could be moved to a 12:30. I've seen that. Or a 5:30, like a 12:30 based on the other teams in European action. We lose on Friday, I'll be deeply concerned. Yeah, if we lose on Friday and say West Ham were to win this weekend, that will be a disaster. That will be an absolute disaster. Ernie Ferguson says, why should we beat Burnley? We have scored 0 goals in 3 games, 2 losses, and Farke doesn't know, and a draw. Farke doesn't do good against them. Why should we beat Burnley? Because they're absolutely pants, mate. I mean, did you watch them last night? I mean, we obviously did the show, but I listened to loads of people, listened to Burnley fans after the game, and obviously watched like the last half an hour of it, and they were absolutely horrendous. We should be beating Burnley. We should be beating Burnley. Are you a Burnley fan, by the way, out of curiosity? Jake says the squad has great unity and togetherness. Other teams just getting new players and settled and fit into new systems. Yeah, I could be wrong, but I'm sure we've only got not scored in 2 home games this season so far. Newcastle and Arsenal. Yeah, I think that's right. What son have you been watching? They're shot hot. Crushed a fairly decent Burnley. I won a Burnley fairly decent, and I'm not on about Burnley in terms of Sunderland in terms of home. If we were going away to Sunderland, I'd be really worried. But just look at Sunderland's away form, mate. It's absolutely horrendous. They are terrible away from home, and proof was in the pudding when they went to West Ham and got absolutely turned over and were out the game by half time. If Okafor starts, I might turn around and go home. I appreciate your calmness throughout. Thank you, mate. I think Burnley will do West Ham. They are strong in defence-ish. Oh, mate, if Burnley beat West Ham, bloody hell, that'd be fantastic for us. Leeds Sunderland is a 5:30 kickoff. Yeah, so that should be a good option for us. It really should. So look, we're in a good position. We are in a good position. And as I said, if we win Friday, we're in a brilliant position because no matter what happens, then we'll maintain 6 points, but we'll also be getting closing in on this 40 points, which is obviously the sort of the position we're trying to get to. So we're not in a bad position, which is why I felt like the outburst. Look, I don't want to talk about Tristan too much more, but that's why I felt like the outburst was a bit unfair. Anyway, thanks all for watching as always, and it's nice, I must admit, you guys might disagree, but it's nice for me just to get back to talk about the footy, because truthfully when we talk about like transfers every day, I don't mind it and I like talking about transfers, as you guys know, but the whole reason you talk about transfers is from on the pitch, so it's nice we can talk about the fixtures and all that stuff coming up. I've enjoyed the show tonight. I don't think Sunderland have won an away game this season. I think they won at Forest, but they definitely won at Forest actually, but yeah. Tadiba's a big miss for West Ham. He is. Burnley are terrible. Stunned as to how Farke is still in a job. No win since October. Yeah, I mean, look, West Ham might lose to them. They might do, but I don't think they will. But I could be wrong. You say this isn't exciting. Remember how bad it was when we used to finish 14th in the Championship and the season went over in March? You can't say this isn't exciting. Yeah, I agree. I mean, we were in absolute cauldrons for a long time, weren't we? I mean, we finished 10th so many times as well, didn't we? But you're right. We were basically season over for a lot of it in when we were 14th. It was a joke. It basically all got changed when Bielsa came in truth. Anyway, as I said, thanks all for watching today. I really have enjoyed the show. It's, as I said, nice talk back about football again. We'll be back tomorrow, and obviously we will be covering Daniel Farke's presser. So we'll see about injury news. Hopefully Beale's back. Hopefully this Justin stuff's not as bad as it seems. Hopefully Rodon's not injured, and hopefully Calvert-Lewin's not injured, which are all the rumours going around. I don't think Calvert-Lewin and Rodon are injured, but we'll find out, of course. Anyway, as I said, thanks for watching, and we'll cover all that tomorrow. And then Thursday, we'll have the preview, and we'll talk all about the Forest game, obviously, and then Friday will be the Forest reaction. Anyway, I shall see you all later, everybody. Bye for now.